Welcome back to another race recap with your Turn 1 host. I'm Jeremiah.
I'm Thomas.
Today, we're going to go over the Chinese Grand Prix. A little bit wild of a weekend. We have a sprint race, so changing up the order a little bit. So I think we're going to start off with the actual sprint race itself, then we'll go ahead and move into the actual race.
Can I add real quick? If y'all have listened to our show before, you know that we've had this thing against sprint races. I'm kind of coming around on the actual race itself. I still don't like how it impacts the overall weekend. I think it takes away from the Grand Prix. I think it puts things out of order. It doesn't give them enough practice time. It does not set up the teams for success on race day. However, I much prefer watching 19 crazy laps of action than 2 practice sessions.
Look at him coming around.
I'm kind of coming around on the sprint thing. All right, take me through the sprint. What did you see? I mean, obviously, Lando's quali, I think, was the story of the day. Didn't pan out in the sprint, but that McLaren is on fire at this point.
Speaking of on fire, real quick, in qualifying, the field was just on fire. So that was a thing.
Look, it's been 5 years. They don't know how to host a race. Next year, there will be half of the fires. They'll learn. They'll figure it out. It's all good.
Anyway, off the jump, we see Lewis flying past Lando, goes up the inside, but Lando fights hard, staying around that outside, gets a little bit squirrely, loses a couple positions there. That kind of hurt. By the time we get to lap 9, Max is already flying in the lead. He's made it from 4th to 1st. Granted, he got a free position with the whole Lando incident, but he just flies through everybody else like they're nothing. We see a little bit of a battle between Alex and Hulk. Besides that, there's a couple other points, I guess, that happen in this race. We have a good battle between Alonso and Sainz as they're duking it out, with Sainz going around the outside at one point, finally getting her past Alonso, but Alonso dive bombs, collides with Sainz just a little bit, and you have a through goes Hamilton moment, but this time with Checo Perez. A little bit after that, we see Sainz getting Sainz shoving off Leclerc as Leclerc's trying to make a move on Sainz. And this whole thing, by the way, all of a sudden you just see Alonso pitting, and you're like, what happened? And then you find out he's got a puncture from slapping the side of Sainz. Leclerc finally gets the move done on Sainz, so that battle comes to a conclusion. After that, we don't see a lot coming out of this race. But hey, Hamilton held on to second, so look at that.
He did, and you know what? So there's a group of 3 drivers that pretty regularly has little battles with each other, and it's Alonso, Sainz, and Checo. I don't know why, but I feel like this entire season, those 3 are the ones that are neck and neck with each other, battling for position. Every single race, I feel like those 3 are grouped up somehow in some configuration. And they put on a really good show because that's 3 really good drivers, 2 of which are in really good cars. And then Alonso, of course, just outperforms what that Aston can do. And so he puts it in good position. I love every time those guys are battling. We saw a little bit more of that in the race outside of the sprint. I will also add that, let's see, where was it? Norris. Okay, this is why the sprint deteriorates from the actual race weekend. We saw him get a little squirrely on turn 1, right? They were dealing with rain a lot through the weekend. That turn 1 is way different than anything else on the Formula 1 track, how it goes around in a long right bend, straight into a left bend. Did McLaren get the car set up wrong, or did he not have enough time to prepare for how to take that corner effectively while being battled? Like, he's sitting in pole, which he's not used to doing. He's battling Lewis Hamilton, which he's not used to doing. And then he only had 1 practice session before taking on this situation. That's where I get a little iffy on these sprints and how they impact the driver's ability.
It's a fair argument. I still want to see more out of the other drivers besides Verstappen. It feels like the sprints are really their only time to shine because, I mean, let's face it, Max is going to get the lead, and once he does, he's hold on to it for the rest of the race. So the sprint is really your only chance to kind of give it everything you got in terms of the tires, in terms of the aggressiveness to hold Max back as far as you can and take a win. But, I mean, we saw that from Oscar Piastri last year, and felt like we had a chance this race because Max was starting in fourth, and we had Lewis Hamilton and Lando Norris out in front, and those two really put up a fight when it comes to Max being behind them, especially Lewis because they kind of got that grudge going still. Um, I saw a lot out of Lewis. He kind of locked up there, which allowed Max to get in DRS range right up behind him, which eventually allowed him to get the pass done. But it really started to feel like 2021 all over again. It was pretty sweet.
Last thing I'll call out is something you already mentioned, which was the through goes Checo moment. So I texted Jeremiah as soon as I saw that in the sprint race. I was like, they did the thing with the through goes Hamilton thing, but it's with Checo. Because it was that exact situation. You have two drivers battling, then out of nowhere, this guy from the North 40 just passes both of them and keeps on going. Speaking of which, check out our Through Goes Hamilton hoodie available at the Turn One podcast shop. Link in the description.
Yeah.
Okay, you ready to move on into some Grand Prix action?
Yeah, we'll kick it off with the turn one breakdown, unless you have any kind of beginning notes here before we jump in.
There's two different qualifyings now. They changed the sprint format this year to where the qualifying is after the whole sprint deal, and so Max goes from qualifying fourth in the sprint to, of course, qualifying first in the race, followed by his teammate Checo, and then Alonso just had a really good qualifying weekend, getting third in. Where did he do? Did he do third in both? Yeah, he got third in both qualies for the sprint and the race.
Mm-hmm.
And then McLaren, which we'll get to, they both qualied higher than Ferraris. That panned out a little bit kind of 50-50 throughout the race. But no, let's go ahead and do turn one.
I don't have a lot of notes for the turn one breakdown. There's 4 big points here that I'm going to hit on. Everybody else just kind of holds position. First of all, as always, Max is gone. Covers off the inside to make sure that nobody passes him, but nobody's going to pass him. Alonso, however, Alonso and Checo, by the way, their reaction time was a tenth off of each other. So there was really no difference there. But Alonso sends it fully on the outside. Granted, Checo had to brake because Max was on the inside as well. But Alonso fully sends it up the outside, goes around Checo, and honestly looked like he had a shot at the first spot. Doesn't go for it though, which rightfully so, because it's probably a little dangerous. So he gets the second spot, and dude holds on to it for a while. We'll get into that as we get into the actual race. But a little further down the grid, we have Leclerc shoving Sainz off the track. I guess that's a little payback for what happened in the sprint race. But in doing so, both Ferraris lose position to George Russell and Nico Hulkenberg, which for those Mercedes to be in front of the Ferrari and for a Haas to be up there really shouldn't happen, but it is what it is, and it's their mistake to deal with. So a little bit past that, we have Ricciardo with a terrible start. He's going to lose positions immediately to Esteban Ocon and Alex Albon. The rest of the grid after that kind of just holds position. I think a lot of people were playing it safe.
So I will add in a couple notes from the back here. One, we watched the F1 TV international broadcast, which is usually Crofty and Brundle, but this week we had Crofty and Nico Rosberg on the primary call. I thought their chemistry was a little odd, but we did get a lot of notes from Nico, mainly about Lewis. I mean,
yeah,
go ahead.
It was cool. It was cool because we got to see. I mean, nobody has studied the mindset of Lewis Hamilton more than Nico Rosberg. I mean, for years they battled, and he's the only person to beat him. So we have kind of this love-hate relationship between the two, as Nico is giving props to Lewis on multiple occasions. He was also a hater, however, so we got to see, oh, Lewis shouldn't have done that. He should know better. And it's like, well,
I thought that he gave a really good perspective at the very start of the race, which is something that I had never thought of. So if you're a regular top 10 qualifier, by the time you line up on the grid, you've got 20, 30, sometimes 40 seconds to just sit there before the race starts while all the other cars come and line up. That's the situation Lewis is used to being in. Lewis is not used to starting 18th, where he's one of the last guys on the grid. And Nico pointed out, yeah, Lewis is experienced, everybody is, but you get really used to your starting procedure and your sequence, which if you're used to sitting there for 15, 20, 30 seconds, you can really take your time, be comfortable, get focused, lock in, whatever. When you pull in 18th, 19th, and 20th, it is stop your car, and then the lights are going on and you're ready to race. And so that could really throw a wrench in your overall preparation. Not saying that it hindered Lewis in this race, but that's something I think we should watch for as these like really tenured drivers that are used to being in the top 10 or so start at the bottom. How do they handle that? Because Lewis didn't have he stepped back there for a while. I mean, he didn't immediately start passing people. So that maybe contributed something to it.
Granted, he really hated those softs that he was stuck on, which is why whenever he pit, he was immediately like, "Those tires were terrible," you know. So honestly, it didn't look like he was able to do much anyway. And the softs were weird in this race. I feel like as more rubber was added to the track, the softs became better. But if you were one of the drivers that started with the softs, you really didn't have an advantage. I mean, nobody that was on softs was making decent passes off the start. And it wasn't until people started changing to the softs in the later stages of the race where you really started to see them come alive.
The tire strategy confused me for that very reason because again, the teams that started on softs really struggled, but then as soon as the teams on softs started switching to other compounds, all the other teams that didn't start on softs started switching to softs. I was like, wait, you just saw that they didn't work, but then suddenly they did work. And so there is something to do with that rubber being laid down on the track. Maybe there was a temperature change that we're not aware of, but it reminded me of Spa a couple years ago where any team that ran hards, was like they were skating on ice, and then teams continued to pit and put on hards, and it just continued to not work. That was
Yeah.
the that was peak Ferrari poor strategy. I think that was 2022 Spa. So I thought it was going to be like that, but it wasn't. I'll add in too on the notes, just the turn one by itself, turn one throughout the race. So this is like turns 1 through 3 or 1 through 4, that whole little loopy spiral section. The outside line surprised me with how quick that outside line was. Every overtake at turn one happened on the outside. We saw it early on with Alonso passing Checo. We saw it later with Leclerc passing Russell there. I don't know why, but I felt like the inside line would be faster, and it just wasn't. And I don't know why.
So this is one of the reasons why I say the Chinese track is like my favorite track of all of them. That turn one is special in that if you do have the outside lane, you do have that advantage. You can go faster with grip still on that outside line. Granted, if it doesn't rain or anything, because we saw a lot of people slipping and sliding trying to do that in qualifying and practice. But when the track is dry, that outside line going into turn one, you can carry more speed, and then going around the outside of other cars, you immediately have the inside line going into turn two. It's a beautiful mix up. It's one of my favorite things about this track. I mean, playing it, obviously we reference this in a lot, but it's the only reference point we have. Playing it in the game is my favorite thing because everybody tries to take the inside line, and I just slide around the outside and I'll get 2 or 3 overtakes.
I guess the risk is what we saw happen to Lando in the sprint where you lose your back end and you kind
Yeah.
of slide out a little bit. I guess that's risk and reward, but it paid off for a lot of drivers throughout the day. We'll make a couple of race notes here. We'll do results, and then we have a couple of discussion points that we want to end on, which I think everybody listening to this would be aware of what some of the discussion points are going to be. They've been all over F1 news for the past couple of days now. Verstappen had a 7.5-second lead by lap 10. He was running 0.6 seconds faster than his teammate Checo, who was in second at that point after he got back around Alonso. He arguably could have finished this race with a 50-second lead had it not been for the safety cars.
Yeah, I'd agree.
I mean, he finished with like a 19-second lead, and that was after 2 safety cars.
Yeah, and that's that's typical of Max Verstappen and what we see. If everything goes correct in the race for everybody else, there's no safety cars, no red flags, no nothing. We will see Max with a good 30, 40 seconds, like typical Max Verstappen.
I've got 2 Aston Martin notes for you. One, I think that with Alonso getting the pass early on Perez, that just shows how good Alonso is. I think Alonso is arguably a better driver than Sergio Perez is. I don't know how to
Well,
justify that.
yeah.
I mean, okay, you might agree wholeheartedly, but somebody else might say you're insane. Like, this isn't 2008 anymore. But with Checo getting the pass back on like lap 6 or 7, whatever it was, that just shows how good of a car Checo has because Alonso was cooking his tires. And I think that's why Alonso didn't even try to make a play at number 1 because he would have just cooked his tires even more trying to fight with Max.
Yeah, I feel like Alonso probably could have had a even better day than the day, which, by the way, Alonso had a crazy good day.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to take anything away from this, but I think he probably would have had a better day if he had played it safe and not tried to battle with Checo. He held him off until lap 5, which is fine. Maybe if he had let him pass probably around 3 or 4 and instead just went full doctor mode on those tires, probably could have had a better day. But the fact that he was even able to fight off that Red Bull for 5 laps, it just shows everything.
He finished well clear of Piastri in 8th by a good 13 seconds or so, but he could have had a chance at Russell's Mercedes or Sainz's Ferrari 2 spots ahead of him had he played a little bit safer with Checo and maybe not even passed Checo at all off the jump. I mean, that might have been, I think Nico pointed out that might not have been the best move for Alonso to battle Checo for as long as he did. My last Aston Martin note is I think their car is faster than the Mercedes car.
You know, I don't think it was at the beginning of the season, but it's definitely a point that can be well argued now. I mean, even Lance Stroll was having a day until something that we'll talk about later on.
Well, I mean, take Lance out of it. I mean, if you put any combination of those 4 drivers in either of those cars, I think they're all running faster in Aston Martins minus Lance's skill thing. I mean, but if you put him in an Aston and a Mercedes, I think he runs faster in the Aston, which again, we talked about this maybe 2 or 3 races ago. It is crazy that Mercedes is now a definitive midfield team. My goodness.
Yeah.
Mercedes is a midfield team with Lewis Hamilton still on the team.
Yeah, and Toto still running the show.
Yeah, it's wild. Last note that I have is I think we can finally say the McLaren has caught up to Ferrari in terms of pace.
I would agree with that in some sense. The Ferraris were still able to catch the McLarens in some instances. You know, I think with Lando's ability to drive, that still puts McLaren a touch up to where they're out of the reach of the Ferraris in terms of like what you're saying, that McLaren has caught up. But if you're looking a little bit further down, maybe at Oscar Piastri, whose pace is just off of Lando's, he's still clearly losing out to the Ferraris in every instance. So it's neck and neck.
Here's how I classify it. I think both Carlos and Charles are better drivers than Lando. And the fact that Lando is now outperforming them tells me something.
I disagree, but I'll
You're
give it to
putting
you.
Lando above Charles or Carlos?
I put him above Carlos.
Dude, Carlos is out here winning races every year.
And a better car.
No.
Yeah.
I disagree. I'm putting both Ferraris not like super far ahead of Lando, but they're both ahead of Lando.
I would say my original output on things was that Leclerc was better than Carlos, and I still think if Leclerc is given a car that completely suits his needs, he is better than Carlos. But as it stands with the car they have, Carlos is better at adapting to whatever car he's given, so he's over Leclerc right now. And I would put Lando in that mix with all 3 of them on equal pace. I think you put them all in the same car, and the order is changed up every single race.
Okay. Do you have any more race notes before we give results and then give our discussions?
I want to say Alonso had an amazing save where he touched the gravel and went completely sideways. If you looked at his steering wheel, he completely gets off the throttle, straightens out the car with the steering wheel, whips it back towards facing forward, gets on the gas, gets DRS, passes Lewis Hamilton, passes Oscar Piastri, all within the next couple corners after almost dipping it into the wall. And that was just baffling to me. That just shows Alonso's crazy skill level. And the fact that at 41, I think, at 41, he still has the reaction time of all of these other youngsters on the grid that he's racing with. And you can't take that away from him.
He's 42, and he got the fastest lap.
42, my mistake. Point even more proven. I have a couple other points that I want to hit on. Pierre Gasly was... if anything and everything could go wrong for him today, it happened. I mean, he got shoved off the track, I think twice, not even just once. He had a 19-second pit stop as he falls off the jack and they couldn't get the tire on. Had to pick him back up on the jack, secure that tire, then send him out. It was horrible. And, you know, this goes along with what we've been talking about all along, that Alpine really needs to get it together because even on days where they're...
Hey, they had their highest qualifying of the year at 13th. I think they're on a good track.
Congrats to the drivers. Anyway, back to the team of Alpine. Y'all are terrible. A couple other points. Um, I mean, there's just so many, like Lance shoving Nico off earlier in the race. Nico finished in the points, by the way, finishing in 10th. So shout out to my boy Nico.
There was a lot of shoving off track, and then you mentioned this with the Alonso thing. Anytime drivers went off track, that gravelly area off the sides of that track, real sketchy.
Yeah, once you touch that, you're going for a ride unless you can save it.
That
My
and the curb
final,
was real sketchy.
yeah, I have two more points, both of them for Red Bull. One, the double stack. Mwah, beautiful. A 2.1 for Max, and then immediately Checo comes in and hits a 2.0, and he's out. And if you looked in the background, you see Valtteri Bottas walking back to his pit, and he stops when the Red Bulls enter and just turns and looks at them as they execute a perfect pit stop, and then just faces back forward and keeps walking. You got to feel bad for him whenever every pit stop that he has is like 19 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds.
And he knows what that feels like. I mean, he knows what the Red Bull perfection feels like because he had that with Mercedes for so long.
Oh, yeah. My final point, the drift around the final corner that Max did just because he could. That
Yeah.
that was
The things,
awesome.
okay, I know they're comfortable in their cars. I know they're the best in the world at what they do. It always sketches me out when a driver does something like that, which we've seen before from Max, the little power slide at the end, or whenever they do the weaving through the finish line, like real crazy, like what if you lose the back end? Just what if you lose the back end and crash? I mean,
It hasn't happened.
do it after you cross the line. I mean, really.
Just play it safe, please.
I know. I know they know how far they can push the car, but man, that sketches me out.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into the results of the race. Max wins, obviously, by quite a bit, maybe 19, 20 seconds, something like that. I don't know. He beats out Lando, who finished in second, which, again, great race for Lando. What a day. Checo comes in third, followed by your Ferraris of Charles and Sainz. George actually finished the race, which I didn't think he would have in my predictions, which I can link those, but I didn't think George would finish, but he did. He played it safe most of the day. Alonso finishing in seventh, Oscar in eighth, Lewis all the way up to ninth. Not a bad day for Lewis considering where he started. And then Nico getting that single point for the Haas team down there in 10th.
I would just like to add real quick. I predicted Max winning, Lando coming in second, and Lewis coming in third. And after the sprint race with Lewis getting second, I was like, oh, my predictions are here, especially with Lando starting first, because I was like, Lando's showing to be faster than Lewis. Lewis is right on that tail. So it's going to be Max, Lando, Lewis. I nailed it. And then Lewis qualified in 18th. And that kind of went out the window. But I got the first two right, Max and Lando.
You were definitely the predictions winner because I think I had Max, Carlos, Lewis.
No,
So
you
I
had
had
Max, Lewis, Carlos, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I think Lewis was third. I wouldn't have put Lewis as second. There's no way. Maybe I did. I don't think I did.
We'll
I
have
don't
to
think
go
I
back.
did. Okay, here's our two big discussions. We're going to talk a little bit about Kick, and then we're going to talk definitely about the Ricciardo and Stroll incident. We've referenced Kick before. Kick, Sauber, Steak, whatever their name is. They are garbage. I'm really happy Zhou got 14th. I mean, I predicted him to get 15th, but he got 14th, pulled that off. But you look at their pit stops, they're still pretty atrocious. I mean, their best pit stop was 3 seconds. Their best was 3 seconds. Like, that's not great. Bottas just has his engine give up on lap 19 or so, and he pulls off the track. And that was a disaster getting that car off the track. I don't know why that took so long. But that led into the safety car laps that we'll get into in a minute. And then on top of his engine not working, on top of the pit stops, which have been all season long, did you see Zhou Guan Yu just slap the mess out of who did he hit? What was it, Magnussen?
Magnussen on the
Yeah,
flyby, yeah.
and just breaks his front wing off.
Which he still then proceeds to take off. So, all right, I'm gonna say everything that you just said, but with a different angle. Ready for this?
Okay.
Kick has been absolutely terrible all season, but as they come into this race, things are finally on the high. Zhou Guan Yu finishes in 14th, an amazing finish for him, an amazing finish for Sauber. Bottas, before everything went bad for him in the engine department, was up almost in the points. He was right there, right on the cusp. They had a 3.0 second pit stop. I mean, this race was awesome for Kick.
I vote Alpine gets replaced by Audi and Kit gets replaced by Andretti, and we'd have a much better F1 season.
Okay.
Those are two teams that just have absolutely nothing going for them right now.
Jeez.
Absolutely nothing. And I feel bad for Valtteri. He deserves better. Even Joe deserves better at this point. Again, we talked about this maybe right before the season started. I'm kind of happy where Joe has been throughout this season. He's not the worst driver like he used to be. He's consistently getting in that kind of 14 to 10 area. He's stepping up a little bit, but his team, I mean, what do you do when you have 20 and 30-second stops regularly? Like what are you supposed to do about that? You can't do anything.
Yeah.
And then in your home Grand Prix, it was his fault that he slapped Kevin Magnussen and broke his end plate off of his wing. But, you know. Yeah. Okay. So Bottas going out, mid-20s lap count here, maybe 26 or something like that.
21.
Because again, they did a virtual to start, right?
No. It was a yellow flag to start for a long period of time before they finally brought out the virtual safety car.
And that almost messed up Lando. Almost, because Lando did the pit thing early. He jumped it, right?
I think Leclerc jumped it and Lando missed it.
Okay, one of those two. But there was some crazy pit stop stuff that ended up not playing out, but it really could have. So we go yellow flag to VSC to full safety car. You get all the drivers bunched up. And as they're coming, this was the ending lap, right? Like this was going to be the last lap of the safety car?
Yes.
The last lap of the safety car, you have two different incidents happen. One, Yuki Tsunoda gets hit by K-Mag.
Yes.
And he spins around and Yuki gets damage to his car, which would later retire him from the race.
Well, his tire exploded. So.
Yeah. So you have that. And then the bigger story. Lance Stroll is coming up. They're coming up to the turn. He's got Ricciardo in front of him. They're all bunching up because they're kind of stopping. They're going to go around a hairpin to the right? So they're all kind of slowing down. And he looks off to the right to go look at the apex of the turn to see where everybody is and just plows straight into Daniel Ricciardo behind him. And Daniel Ricciardo does a great job of not hitting, was it a McLaren in front of him? Was it Piastri?
Yeah, it's a good story, Thomas. I'm going to have to cut you off here. I'm going to have to tell the real story here.
That's exactly how it happened.
I had to analyze this from multiple different views to get the full story. So here's what actually happens. Fernando Alonso is about to slap the back of a Ferrari. So he goes hard on the brakes and instead of turning into the apex, goes straight on. And of course, because of all that, he gets a lockup. His tires are spinning, smoke's flying. Then you have the McLaren behind him. George Russell behind him, and then the McLaren behind him. They're all trying not to hit him. So they all follow him because they don't want to pass him too, because you can't pass under a safety car. So they're following him as they go head on straight out. This causes Ricciardo to also slam on the brakes, and he is right behind Oscar Piastri. And in doing this, here comes Lance Stroll, who doesn't see what's happening because he's not paying attention, slaps right into the back of Ricciardo. Ricciardo goes airborne, damages the back of Oscar Piastri's McLaren in front of him, causing Oscar to lose a lot of pace for the rest of the race. And then Ricciardo gets blamed for the whole thing by Lance. Make it make sense.
The post-race interviews with Danny were really telling because you don't see him mad often. And he even started his questioning by saying, I was on my way to calming down, and then I heard what Lance said about the incident, and now I'm just upset again.
Yeah.
Because, from one driver to another, Lance should have just owned up and said, not that he wasn't paying attention. He was paying attention to the wrong area. He was looking a couple of cars ahead, trying to see what he was about to do at this turn, when he should have just been watching the guy in front of him. Because, which driver was it? Maybe it was Lando. Somebody said, it's really telling because no other driver hit another driver. Yeah, they all had to slam on their brakes. Yeah, they all had to kind of adapt to whatever Alonso did in front of them, but they all did it except for him.
Exactly.
And I don't know what the greater punishment for this is, but they've really got to take a look at Lance Stroll because that was horrible from a driver perspective. He ruined Daniel Ricciardo's day, busted up his rear diffuser. Danny ended up retiring a little bit later. Just couldn't keep that car on the track. I mean, the lack of awareness in a safety car where they're not even going that fast. Like, just lay off, dude. I don't know. I don't know what the penalty is. I don't know what the punishment is. They might have already done everything they were going to do, but Lance Stroll, I'm at the point where he shouldn't be in F1. I mean, the guy doesn't have it. He is underperforming in a car that is pretty good, especially last year. That car had some pace on it. He's ruining drivers' days. He's a safety hazard. We've seen him make really dangerous moves on track throughout his several-year career now, cutting drivers off, brake checking drivers. I'm kind of done with Lance Stroll.
Yeah, it's tough because I wanted to start liking Lance. I was enjoying that he was starting to get better and better and better, but ultimately what ended up happening with this is that it just showed that if you're a paid driver, it can only get you so far. Yeah, it can get you to the big dance, but really you shouldn't be staying at it. And the only reason why he's still there, unfortunately, is because Daddy bought pretty much all of Aston Martin. No, not the racing team, the company.
The British luxury car company, Aston Martin. I struggle with it because you can't. I mean, I guess you could give him enough points on his super license to make him ineligible, but it's kind of the culmination again of all the different instances. Wasn't he the one that cut off Fernando Alonso back when they were on different teams?
Yeah, I believe so.
And
Yeah, and then
and
they were
did break.
teammates.
Yeah, he did a brake check, and then the very next year they were paired up
Oh
together.
yeah, Alonso was on Alpine, and then he slammed into the back of him, causing him to go airborne and fly halfway down a straight. I do
Yep.
remember this taking place.
I mean, we see stuff like that every couple of races, maybe 2 or 3 times a year from Lance, where he does some dangerous, crazy move. And then this one, not that it's even that dangerous, like no one was going to get hurt out of that. But the fact that you just took one driver out and potentially, if Danny Rick wasn't just on the brake, you could see his wheels not moving. Like his wheels were just scraping the ground. He could have taken out Piastri. He could have taken out everybody in front of them. That could have been a 6-car pileup because Lance wasn't paying attention.
Wild.
And then I don't know how I haven't seen anybody on X or Instagram or whatever agreeing with Lance's rationale. I think everybody that I've seen agrees that it was 100% his fault.
Well, yeah,
I
that was
don't
just
know.
ridiculous.
I don't even know what the explanation would be for, like, even if he was just looking at Danny Rick and didn't react in time, it's still his fault for not reacting in time.
He goes, "What an idiot! He brake checked me." Really? Really?
Even if he did, okay, stop.
You're going safety car speeds. It's not like you're flying around the corner going 180.
And you didn't need to be that up. I mean, they still had a good bit to go. Like that lap had almost just started, right? Like it wasn't like Max wasn't about to just take off. The safety car was still out.
I don't know. Was the safety car still out, or did
I think
Max
the
end up
safety car
taking
was
off
still out.
a little bit after that?
I don't think they
No,
were
no, no,
bunched up
no.
ready for a restart yet.
I think they were, because Max ended up taking off a little bit after this, and then you hear the announcers going, "Oh, and there's a collision in the back, or there's something in the
Oh, yeah.
back."
Maybe it was just going into the pit, and that's where they were bunching up then. Okay. Either way, I'm done with Lance Stroll. And that is a quick preview of what I think will be our next week episode, which is drivers that F1 would be better off without.
Spoiler
So
alert! It
mark
includes
your
Lance Stroll.
mark your calendars and tune in for that. Just to wrap up, we'll look at our standings. Red Bull's finally starting to pull away from Ferrari. Ferrari kept it close for a little bit, but that's starting to look like a fading dream more and more. McLaren has a pretty good gap between them and Ferrari, but we'll see as the season goes on if Lando can get some really solid points. Maybe he can make up the difference. And then Mercedes is ahead of Aston. which they've changed over the past couple of weeks. They've kind of gone back and forth. I think the big question marks there remain Lance and George. I mean, it seems like Lewis and Fernando are going to get pretty consistent points this year. What can the number 2 drivers do? I don't know. And then we still have 3 teams sitting on 0 points. Williams and Kick, not really big surprises, but Alpine is still a surprise at 0 points this way through the season.
Well, Albon not making it in the top 10 yet is a little shocking considering how many times he did it last year.
He was almost invisible this weekend.
Yeah, kind of irrelevant. No action whatsoever, except for like a minor battle in the sprint race. I mean, he was really non-existent. And so was Sargent. He's just kind of out there. I do want to give a shout out to the Haas boys for bringing upgrades to both cars. It was projected that they were only going to be able to bring the upgrades to Magnussen, but they ended up getting them out for both cars. And I want to say with the whole 3 teams behind them having 0 points, I want to say that VCarb and Haas are pretty much pulling away, and they're no longer the back markers. I want to say VCarb and Haas are now in the midfield, and the back markers now just consist of Williams, Alpine, and
Renault or
Kick.
Alpine.
Kick.
Yeah, Kick. And yeah, I guess your line of separation there is that you have RB at 7 points. Now, of course, it's a big gap up to Aston Martin at 40, but RB at 7, Haas at 5, and you have 3 teams at 0. So there's tiers here, and they're pretty clearly defined. Now, if Williams can get a couple points, they jump into that next bracket with those 2 teams. If Kick can pull off a point, which I mean, Kick is really only being held down by their internal team performance at this point. It's not even really the drivers that are holding back Kick. It's the car and it's the pit stops. Alpine just stinks all the way around. So I don't really know what I don't know what they need to fix other than everything at Alpine.
Jeez.
Okay, guys, let us know in the comments. We're going to film this in the next couple of days, but which drivers shouldn't be in F1 anymore?
Guys, if you think we've got it all wrong, Lance Stroll is the next GOAT. He just hasn't had his opportunity yet. I might die with you on that hill, but I think I'll pass.
All right, guys, we'll see you.
Bye, guys.